what you have to do, and what the group was looking at, was the interaction between the social welfare system and the tax system. And unlike other countries, we haven't integrated that very much so far. So, for instance, in our tax code, which is very astonishing, we don't recognise the existence of children. But a married couple, for instance, we do recognise that a married couple get double tax allowances, but we don't recognise children because 20 or 30 years ago a policy decision was made, which I agree with, to actually pay child benefit not through the tax system but to pay it directly in cash to the caring parent, and by and large 96% of the payments are made to mothers.
Minister,
and I support that.
You've had this gig for the last 2 years now. It's coming up in 2 years on the 6th of March. I've had the conversation we're having with Seamus Brennan, with Mary Coughlin, with Mary Hanafin, with all the former ministers for social protection who say the tax code is being looked at and why we can't tax. It seems like there's some problem in there with the civil servants or with computers or with people talking to each other that successive ministers haven't been able to overcome.
The report actually, again, is very valuable in that respect, because I agree with what you're saying there. I think this debate, I had a look at some of the earlier discussions. I think it kicked off sometime in the early 1980s, when I presume you were probably in school at that stage. And possibly it has been an item which has come up for detailed discussion. Now, the point about the advisory group is they've actually sat down and done the work and the analysis, and more importantly, they've actually published it, and I've published it, and it's important that as a society we have a discussion about this.
The Irish Independent today describes you as a minister who's one report away from actually reform.
Well, no,
all talk, no action.
I would say to the Irish Independent, firstly, there's the most fundamental reform of social welfare broadly going on since I became minister, with the way we're changing around social welfare offices and so on. But secondly, we began the reform in this budget by recycling a significant amount of money to after-school care. And secondly, and this is important, my department spends some money on hot breakfast for children, and in a very tight budgetary situation, out of the savings and child benefit, we've actually increased that allocation, and that's what's important. It's giving children the best start, and where some of our children miss out is that we don't have as big or as extensive a preschool system or an after-school care system. Let me just say this
let me ask you then about a bigger plan, Minister, because you've been 2 years, as I said, in a couple of weeks on the 6th of March. First of all, is it your intention to stay in this ministry if the government serves its full term, to stay in there for another 3 years?
Well, I serve, like other people, on the nomination of the Taoiseach and of the Taoiseach. No, I have committed.
Would you like to stay in social protection for 3 more years?
I have to say I'm absolutely committed to reforming social welfare, and I believe that in 2 years I have done a significant amount with the cooperation of the staff of the department. Just let me go back.
Minister, that was a great answer. You didn't touch the question. Would you like to stay there for another 3 years?
I'm happy working in social welfare.
The reason I ask you that
I'm tremendously dedicated to working in social welfare, because at the end of the day, there's two sides to our economy. There's the tax side and how we collect the money, and then there's the spending side and how we spend it. And social welfare, believe it or not, is paid to an incredible number of families in one form or another, including child benefit, to the vast majority of people in this country who have children.
Minister,
but we have to try and get the outcomes in terms of child poverty. We have to get better outcomes.
I accept all that. The reason I'm asking that is because I really do fret at us discussing a budgetary measure in some depth and people worrying about the budget instead of getting on with life in February 2013. And the reason I asked you if you're in there for another 3 years is, what's the vision? What type of a social welfare system or child benefit system do you want to leave?
Well, it's very simple.
One that's taxed?
We want one which actually encourages everybody to be involved in working, because again, coming back to children who are at risk of poverty or poor outcomes, the worst outcomes are for children in families where none of the adults in the household are working. And the example that's given shows that, for instance, children are also at risk of poverty if the income of the household is below 25,000. Now, as a society, we have to think about that. I've been talking over the years to organisations involved in lobbying in relation to children's issues, and I think most people are now agreed we need a strong cash income support, but we also need as a country to invest in childcare. Let me say this in relation to finance, Chris. Finland had a bank crash as big or worse than ours in the 1980s. One of the measures they took was to invest in areas like preschool and education to get better outcomes for children, and guess what? In doing that, they got an overall better outcome for their economy.